You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly is brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is a spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com. Caneswear.com. And welcome into a new episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly. I know it's been a couple weeks since we last spoke. I think this was before the Combine was my last episode. And I am your host, Kevin Dern. You can follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4. You can follow the show on DolphinsTalk.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. And we're back for another installment. This time, it's the free agency edition, sort of a wrap-up of the first and second waves of free agency. And then we're also going to do a little bit of a mock draft exercise here again, as we did on the end of the last episode. That's coming up in the end of the show. First, and I regret to inform you, we do have a whiskey segment this week, but it is not whiskey I have. I've actually got a beer tonight. Someone had got me a six-pack of Three Floyds Robert the Bruce. Three Floyds is a brewery in Muncie, Indiana. They're mostly known for their IPAs. You know, if you've ever had Alpha King, Zombie Dust, Gumball Head, Space Station, Middle Finger, just a handful of the IPAs that they have. And I usually hate IPAs. I can drink all of those. Three Floyds makes really good stuff. And Robert the Bruce is actually a Scottish ale. But I had a six-pack of it just kind of in the fridge, and I was watching some March Madness earlier today on a Saturday. Figured why not crack open a cold one or two. So here we are, Robert the Bruce. And you get a lot of the same kind of maltiness you would get with a Scotch. And, it's a darker beer, but it doesn't drink like a darker beer. It's not heavy, sort of like a Guinness in that realm, but pretty tasty, and you get almost kind of like a real faint hit of almost like a wheat beer, or a little bit of like fruitiness on the very finish of it, which is kind of true for their IPAs too. That's kind of the signature of Three Floyds in my opinion. But just a good beer. Give it a try if you like it. I'd give it, I don't know, probably 4 stars out of 5 on my beer ratings list if I had one, but I'm not much of a beer drinker these days anymore. Meaning that if I do drink a beer, it's no more than like 3 at a time, and I'm usually drinking something fairly light that I can still function on. Nothing anywhere close to my college days at the University of Dayton, and more of a Scotch and bourbon drinker these days anyway. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to dive into the Dolphins off-season, and we're going to break the show up into kind of 3 segments. I'll give you my overall thoughts and rundown on the free agents they've signed, the free agents they've retained, what that means, both for the 2025 season and for the future. We'll also talk about kind of the 3 moves I like the most, and then we'll get into the mock draft scenario. So unless you've been living under a rock, we'll just kind of take these in chronological order here. Obviously we knew about Teron Armstead restructuring to the veteran minimum. We knew about Bradley Chubb restructuring his contract. They've just restructured Austin Jackson. All those moves saved about $37 million for 2025. Not all of that is going to be used. Obviously, I think you usually save about $8 to $10 million for your rookie draft class, your undrafted free agents, your practice squad guys, and then any kind of emergent moves you would need during the season. But just kind of running through the list, they've given ERFA tenders to tackle Keon Smith and linebacker Cameron Good. They've given a right of first refusal tender to cornerback Kader Kohu, no movement on there. They retained Matt Dickerson, Quentin Bell, Elijah Campbell on one-year contracts, as well as D. Eskridge, Jackson Carman, Liam Eichenberg, and Benito Jones. The only free agent that they retained with more than a one-year deal was linebacker Tyrell Dodson, who got a 2-year, $8.25 million contract. Not a big fan of that move. I get why the Dolphins are doing it. Like, historically, Chris Greer has always tried to make it so that if you had to play a game before the draft, you could field a roster and at least be competitive in that game. Not a big fan of Tyrell Dodson's game. I know he had interceptions last year. He's not very good against the run. And that money is pretty high compared to what they've given some of the other players in free agency so far. Chronologically, the external free agents they brought in, Zach Wilson is a backup quarterback, 1 year, $6 million. Pretty high there, but I think Miami, more so than every other one of the 31 teams in the league besides them, has to pay special mind to backup quarterback because Tua's injury history is what it is. It's not good. They signed James Daniels. This is the one big contract they handed out, and that's relatively speaking 3-year, $24 million contract. But I think something like only $5.5 million is due to him over the first 2 years. So it's a pretty team-friendly deal early on. They signed Larry Borum, offensive lineman from the Bears, to a 1-year deal. Ifeatu Melifonwu, the safety from Detroit, to a 1-year deal, but his was worth $4 million, which I think is interesting because Ashton Davis, the other safety they signed, is a 1-year, $2.5 million contract. So I think that tells you a little bit. Nick Westbrook-Akine, 2 years, $6.5 million. KJ Britt, a 1-year deal. We don't know the terms yet. Alexander Madison, a 1-year deal for just a shade under $2 million. Pharaoh Brown, Ryan Stonehouse, Artie Burns, and Willie Gay Jr. all signed 1-year contracts, terms of which have not been disclosed yet. And then obviously they dropped Raheem Mostert, Durham Smythe, and Kendall Fuller were all released, saving another $8 million. So the Dolphins have basically done things to free up money, and they've basically spent it to where their current salary cap debt is about the same as the 2025 salary cap outlay. So the Dolphins, and if you go on Twitter, Chris Kaufman at CK Parrott from the 3 Yards Per Carry crew has a great thread from this. It's basically future salary cap debts for each team that is still owed to players. Philadelphia leads the league. Their total is astronomical, but they're basically cycling out all that debt in 2029 when all the network deals, the TV network deals, expire. So they're going to get a huge influx of cash from Netflix or whatever other network gets involved. TNT, Amazon have all been rumored. Netflix the strongest of the three. But you're going to get to see a huge cash influx to the NFL through that, and thus a very large raise in the salary cap. So Philadelphia has timed it out right. And you have other teams like the Saints who just continue to plow forward, blindly through the night with this salary cap debt that just keep going. You have Cleveland, who's, I think, the second or third hardest up team with future debts. They're sort of pumping the brakes and trying to dump money and get out of it. And what I think we see here is the Dolphins kind of following suit with what the Browns are doing. In essence, the bank is closed. And I think, this is just my opinion, I think for the first time ever, we are really seeing an accountability standard set forth by the Dolphins, whether that's Stephen Ross, whether that's Brandon Shore, or Ross doing it on Shore's advice, whether it's Tom Garfinkel, Dan Marino, Mickey Mouse, I don't know who. But if you look at the memo that Ross released after the Dolphins lost to the Jets, and basically, I'm paraphrasing, because there's been a lot of people out here being gotcha police lately. Paraphrasing here, that the Dolphins essentially, there's no change in leadership, but the standard has to be met. The Dolphins have to win. And you look at what the Dolphins have done with the money. If you look at these free agents they've brought in, there's very, very little guaranteed money beyond the 2025 season that's expected to be doled out to these guys. Even from last year's free agent group, very, very little guaranteed money beyond 2025. So I think what we're seeing now, and again, check out Chris Kaufman's thread on this at CK Parrott. It's for the first time ever, sort of the bank of Ross is closed, and we've seen back-to-back years now at end-of-season media availability press conferences where both Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel, Grier especially, have basically cried foul about the number of injuries that they've had. 2 years ago, it was all the pass rushers on defense went down before the playoffs. Grier specifically called out Tua Tagovailoa by name after this year, saying it's unacceptable for him to miss that much time. You can argue the semantics behind it to death. Apparently, I've learned that the hard way. You can argue the semantics over it, whether, Tua was ready to come back or did they put him on IR? Were they forced to put him on IR? Fact of the matter is he didn't clear the concussion protocol till the Friday before the Arizona game. Now, you have the bye mixed in there and all that stuff. Whatever the case is, and this is the Dolphins talking out of both sides of their mouth through Chris Grier, they weren't happy with it, but they may have been the ones who put themselves in that situation. This is the kind of leadership you're dealing with. And I think for the first time we've seen Stephen Ross said, okay, you keep crying about all these injuries. You say you've built a winner. You think you built a winner. You're confident in your process. That's a direct quote from Chris Grier. They are confident in their process. What that is, I haven't the slightest fucking clue because their process hasn't worked in 25 years. I think Ross, for the first time, is finally saying, prove it. And if you follow the money here and what they're doing with the salary cap, you are essentially choosing to hit the brakes and pivoting course. They've got too many high leverage, high dollar contracts to guys who are either injury prone or are close to or are already over 30 years of age, or both. That would be Tua. That would be Tyreek Hill, Teron Armstead, although he's since amended his contract, Bradley Chubb, who's amended his contract, Jalen Phillips, who's on a fifth-year option, Jalen Ramsey, Jalen Waddle, one of the few guys who doesn't fit the injury-prone category, and then Chop Robinson you spent a first-round pick on, so eventually his money will be a little bit higher. I think what they're pivoting to is back to the sort of we need to draft and develop. They've got 10 picks. I think I shared this on the last podcast, but internally they know they want more picks. Will they be able to get them? I don't know. We already know they've bitched and moaned about culture problems, which I think traces back to Mike McDaniel's, being too much of a player-friendly coach and running sort of Club Med atmosphere down in the facility. There's a whole host of problems that just smell like rotten fish emanating from Miami Gardens right now. And I think for the first time, Stephen Ross has actually put his finger on the scale and said, okay, prove that you can do this. Past coaches, Adam Gase and Stephen Ross got in a shouting match. Joe Philbin, you got absolutely blasted the first 4 games of 2015. He should have been fired after the 2013 collapse. Brian Flores didn't play nice in the sandbox and became an ego monster. Never really before has it been about accountability. It's been more about personality. This time, because I think this is the one set that actually works together and plays by Ross's rules, goofy as they are, now you've had a losing season and things are trending in the wrong direction, after you've just had a huge period from 2020 to 2024 where your budget, because Tua was on a rookie deal, your budget was essentially greater than every other team in the entire league within the constraints of the salary cap because of the teardown you did in 2019, and you have absolutely nothing tangible to show for it. The best you've been able to do is lose in the wild card round. That's simply, number one, aiming too low, and simply number two, you're not achieving the goal. And then you had a losing season because you tried to play the compensatory pick game that blew up in your face. Christian Wilkins got hurt for the first time. It's very Dolphins. And now for the first time he's saying, okay, you guys need to prove you can build a winner. And what all this means, these sea changes that you're seeing, are essentially they are setting the stage to make sweeping changes after 2025. Fucking finally, in my opinion, because it should have been done last year and Greer should have been gone long ago. But essentially, it smells like Greer, McDaniel, and if Tua Tagovailoa gets hurt again, those three are probably all gone. You can get rid of Hill, Chubb. Jalen Phillips is on a fifth-year option, so if there's more injuries with those guys or more culture problems with those guys, you're making sweeping changes after the 2025 season, and you've got flexibility to get rid of the quarterback contract and move on. Now, I know everyone's going to start like, well, dead cap. Stephen Ross has plenty of money. That's fine. If you're making all those sweeping changes, you're going to take the hit. You got to take the medicine then. So at that point, I would say, what does it matter? This roster isn't very good. It's talented in certain spots at the top. It's a top-heavy roster. But is it a good roster? Are your players 10 through 53 better than the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills, the Bengals for the most part? The answer is no. It's no. These are the teams the Dolphins cannot beat. They haven't been able to beat under Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer. It just doesn't happen. It hasn't happened. And, you can look at it and say, well, even if you get rid of Tua post June 1st, you're still eating $62 million in dead money. So what? The Broncos ate $85 million in dead money for Russell Wilson. They spread it over 2 years. That's still a hellacious amount of money. Take your medicine and just be done with this entire triumvirate here if things go south in 2025. And to me, for the first time, I don't know, since maybe the coming out of the Cam Cameron era when they hired Bill Parcells, for the first time, I think someone has essentially made moves to where the bigger picture looking forward isn't just bleak. It's a refreshing stance from the Dolphins, albeit a year late and, ham-handedly executed. But it's here. It's refreshing to see that accountability is at least financially being called for. So, the situation is not ideal, but it's palatable. And if you move on from all those other names too, you can really free up quite a bit of money. And I'm still curious to see what they would do with Tyreek Hill, because his bonus this year, which I believe is slightly more than $15 million, does not kick in until August 31st. So you could still, in theory, trade him before the draft, post June 1st, whichever one you want to do. And I believe you free up about $62 million in cap space over the next 2 seasons. That's not a bad deal. And I think to couple off this, you look at what they've done roster-wise, there's a few glaring spots that need tending to. But if you were to spend a pick on a receiver and got a guy that you really liked, you might feel more confident in getting rid of Tyreek Hill now and just sort of starting this process. And maybe, above all else, maybe that buys Greer and McDaniel more time. I hope it doesn't, because they've been around long enough and they have many warts, that some of which are just completely contemptibly inexcusable for them to still be in their jobs. But obviously they are still neither here nor there at this point. maybe, just maybe, you're starting to see the Dolphins kind of grow up and someone is at least attempting to step up and be the adult in the room, which I like. Now, that's not to say everything's been bad. If we're looking strictly at 2025 in a vacuum, I think there's some moves that they've made where you can reasonably expect those positions to be as good. You're basically staving off any backsliding, or better than the player who was in that position last year. And we'll go through 3 names plus 2 honorable mentions where I think the Dolphins actually made improvement, even though they haven't chosen to spend big dollars. Now, one of those is the guy they spent the most money on. That's James Daniels, the guard who came over from the Steelers. If you've watched his appearance on Travis Wingfield's show, Drive Time, he's an excellent interview. One of those players that could talk X's and O's all day. Just a very smart guy in general, I think, in all accounts. But really enjoyed listening to him talk about how he studies film, how he's already sort of made a catalog of stuff going back to when he was with the Bears back to 2019, how he's operated. And he did give us one nugget where, and I'll paraphrase this because I'm not going to pull up the direct quote, but essentially he made a comment where, he likes being surrounded by good players as a guard. And he specifically mentioned, the center and the right tackle as it relates to the Dolphins, because he was a left guard and a center in Chicago when he played for the Bears, and then he was a right guard for the Steelers. I think he's going to end up being the starting right guard, slotting himself between Aaron Brewer and Austin Jackson. Now, I've watched some of James Daniels' tape. I think, first and foremost, he's a much, much better pass protector than anyone we've had at right guard, not named Robert Hunt, in the last, really since Jermon Bushrod was here in 2016. And Bushrod being a former left tackle, you kind of got that. James Daniels is pretty impressive in pass pro. He's 6'4", he's 325, 330, so he's got some mass to him. Doesn't get pushed back easily. I think the biggest thing with him is you can beat him, he can overset at times, but he's very smart. He picks up twist games very well. He doesn't get a lot of pushback, when he's one-on-one. I'd recommend watching his game against Grady Jarrett and the Falcons from last year. I think in the run game, he gets a nice push. He can get out in space. You could use him very well on screens and the outside zone stuff and the toss plays that the Dolphins have liked to do under Mike McDaniel. I think that fits very well. I think kind of where he struggles is, at least on the tape, was when Pittsburgh asked him to do some more of the gap stuff. If you're trying to cross-face a 3 and pin him back inside, that's a little trickier for him to do. Taking a nose tackle on, the backside, trying to do a cutoff block there is a little trickier for him to do. The power and the phone booth is not as much as what we had with Robert Hunt. It's not as much as what we had with Solomon Kinley when he was the right guard in 2020. But he can move. He can move very well, very effectively. So as long as he's coming back off the Achilles in good shape, I think that's a really nice fit at right guard. Player number 2 was actually the player most recently signed. That was Willie Gay Jr., a linebacker who Miami signed from the New Orleans Saints. He played there for 1 year after being drafted out of Mississippi State by the Kansas City Chiefs. This one is interesting because if you watch his Saints tape, I don't think the Saints had a great plan for how to utilize him. To me, he's a better player against the run than Tyrell Dodson. To me, this feels like Willie Gay probably has the best shot to play next to Jordan Brooks on first down, or first and second down against run-heavy teams. He's got some flexibility in that he can also kind of widen out and be an overhang player in the slot, kind of the same way Jordan Brooks is. So you could also say not only could he play alongside of him, but like if Jordan Brooks got hurt, he's probably your direct replacement for Jordan Brooks. The other thing is, at least within New Orleans, to a lesser extent in Kansas City, he has experience playing on the line of scrimmage. So if Anthony Weaver is inclined to utilize some of the under and over fronts where you have a Sam backer on the ball, I think Willie Gay probably has a chance to unseat Quentin Bell as that guy. And I think if you went to sort of a true 4-3 stack system, he could be that third guy on the field with Jordan Brooks and most likely Tyrell Dodson, and not get pushed around. I know they also signed KJ Britt, who just to me seems more of like a run plugger. Willie Gay's more than that. He's pretty good in coverage if you give him an easy assignment. He's the biggest linebacker on the team, 6'1", 245, but he can run. He ran in a 4.48 in the combine. So he can move, and it shows. Ryder McConville on YouTube did a pretty nice breakdown about some of his coverage abilities in the slot. For a bigger linebacker, he can move pretty well. His reactionary athleticism when players break, especially if they have a two-way go in the slot or coming out of the backfield, is much better than any Dolphins linebacker I think we've had in a long, long time. I'd feel pretty confident about him as a player in coverage. If you've watched some of the clips, Brian Baldinger broke down a couple different ways how the Chiefs used him as a spy against the Bills and Josh Allen. But he wasn't just lined up straight in the middle. Sometimes he was lined up outside the defensive end. Sometimes he was inserted into a B gap and would even engage a blocker, but would still act as a spy. I think he's very good at getting off blocks, unlike Tyrell Dodson. I just don't think his trigger is consistently where you'd want it to be. But it would not surprise me one damn bit if he ended up being another 3-down linebacker next to Jordan Brooks and Tyrell Dodson was relegated to backup duty. I know the money doesn't indicate that, but I think that's very plausible. And in addition to that, I think with the whole linebacker room, you already had Jordan Brooks. You've brought in Willie Gay Jr., you brought in KJ Britt, and you've re-signed Tyrell Dodson. I think that probably takes you out of the market for a linebacker unless, someone falls to you unexpectedly at a pick. For instance, I know for a fact that the Dolphins appreciate Carson Schlesinger, the linebacker out of UCLA. But is there any guarantee you're going to get him in the second or third round? I don't know. But if he fell, maybe that's something where you would kind of override some of these one-year deals and take a guy like that. It doesn't speak very well for Channing Tindall, and this is kind of the weird thing we talked about earlier with the draft and development. The Dolphins haven't done a very good job of that under Mike McDaniel. Channing Tindall has played 21 defensive snaps in 3 years. Eric Ezukama, I think, has 2 catches in 3 years. Cameron Good didn't even make the team his first or second year. Got called up from the practice squad to be a special teamer. Out of the draft class in 2022, Skylar Thompson's got the most snaps. The best thing they found in 22 was Kader Kohu as a UDFA. 2023, Cam Smith, 2 different years, 2 different defensive coordinators, injuries both years. He's been in the doghouse, has some off-field habits that are not conducive to getting in the good graces of your coaches. You can probably read into that as you will, and you're probably right, whatever your opinion is. Not good. Really, the only pick they hit on the first 2 years was Devon Achane. Even then, some of the undrafted free agents they've had, outside of Kader Kohu, who have they really developed that stuck around? Chris Brooks is gone. Brandon Pilley is gone. Ethan Bonner can't crack the lineup. He's probably not going to be on the roster this year. I forget the name of the safety they had who played in 2 or 3 games. Braylon Sanders played in a couple games, but those guys are all gone. Kader Kohu's been the one guy. I guess Julian Hill but I think you would argue, his development kind of stalled in year 2. So the whole sea change shift here of, going from these high leverage, high dollar contracts to draft and develop, I don't know. I have a hard time buying that this is going to be successful, but we'll see. But I like Willie Gay Jr., and it wouldn't surprise me one damn bit if he ends up the other starter next to Jordan Brooks. The third one I like is Ifeatu Melifonwu, the safety from Detroit. Now, this one's interesting because the Dolphins' secondary coach, Brian Duker, was in Detroit when Ifeatu Melifonwu was there. A bigger safety. He's 6'3", 210, out of Syracuse. He's had ankle issues pretty much every year. That's his thing. He's missed games. He's played in 37 of 68 possible games in his career. Not a good sign. When he's healthy, though, I think he's a much better fit at safety than Ashton Davis. And it pains me a little bit because I was a big Ashton Davis fan when he came out of the draft. Melifonwu is interesting because you can play him as a split field safety deep. You can play him as a single high safety if you do a lot of post-snap rotations and disguise stuff, which, hint, hint, the Dolphins do a ton of. Or you can play him down in the box or as an overhang defender on the edge. He's actually a sneaky good blitzer. I think has 4.5 sacks in his career. He's rangy. He's long. Not super fast, but good enough athlete, covers enough ground, makes enough tackles to where you're like, okay, taking a 1-year prove-it deal, as long as he can communicate the system, which he should be able to, having been in Detroit. The system is pretty similar, at least in terms of the secondary. I think he's going to be a lot better than Jordan Poyer if he can stay healthy. I still, even though they signed Ashton Davis and brought back Elijah Campbell and have Patrick McMorris, I'm very curious what they'll do if Malachi Starks is on the board at 13 or wherever they pick in the first round, because he seems like the ideal safety you would want to have to team with Melifonwu. But we'll get to the mock draft stuff later. And I know a lot of people are high on Ashton Davis because of the 8 interceptions. I'm curious how well he's been able to grasp defenses, because Robert Saleh's system is pretty heavily marked in zone, and Ashton Davis's playing percentages aren't very high. I think 26% of the snaps was the highest he got. So I'm curious there. The money's also different. Melifonwu got basically double the contract Ashton Davis did. But for a third safety, for instance, if you want to play split field safeties and have Melifonwu down in the slot, I think that's fine. I think that's much better than Marcus May a year ago. And then my 2 honorable mentions here are receiver Nick Westbrook-Akine. Essentially, to me, he's replacing River Craycraft. I'm not expecting huge production in the pass game. I think he's essentially coming in as a blocking receiver. And there's some cool cut-ups out there on YouTube with him blocking, and you can run him through gaps and have him go onto linebackers and crack guys on the edge. Like, he can do some cool stuff. I'll be pretty impressed if he catches more than 25 passes. And then Ryan Stonehouse, the punter. Hard not to be better than Jake Bailey, but if Stonehouse can recover from the injury, that'd be pretty impressive. He's also a pretty good athlete as a punter. I did see one stat where they were playing the Ravens and Devin Duvernay had a pretty big return. Dolphins fans should remember him very fucking well, given the torture he's caused us over the years. But Ryan Stonehouse clocked like 20 miles per hour, game speed and GPS, and caught Devin Duvernay on a return one time. So, not a slouch of an athlete there. I think the rest of the signings, like Pharaoh Brown is interesting as a blocking tight end. Artie Burns is interesting as a special teams guy. KJ Britt, maybe a goal line defender and special teams guy. The 2 that are interesting to me in a bad way would be Larry Borum, because his tackle tape is just atrocious, yet they list him as a tackle on the team side. I know that doesn't always mean anything, but just odd that that's what they chose to do. And obviously they brought back Liam Eichenberg, which is just kind of a microcosm for this team. They don't know how to move on. Is this Chris Grier trying to triple down and say, he's still a good player? He traded up for Liam Eichenberg and passed on Creed Humphrey, the center for the Chiefs, to draft Liam Eichenberg. And now he's back again after you basically played him at all 5 positions, and he shouldn't be starting at any of them. So those two are the odd ones to me, and I hope, much as I despise Chris Grier and beginning to despise Mike McDaniel, I hope that that's not what Chris Grier called investing in the offensive line. If they're just done, well, then you might as well fire him now. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens in the draft. And speaking of the draft, let's go ahead as we kind of wind up the show here. We're nearing 40 minutes of a runtime. Let's do a mock draft scenario, and we'll walk through another one. I think we'll do this a couple more times before the actual draft, so we'll have a sip of a Robert the Bruce here. So the last time we did this, we did the PFN, the Pro Football Network mock simulator. We're going to mix it up this time. We'll do a 3-round draft selection on the Pro Football Focus on NFL.com simulator. So no trades, but I think their draft board is much, much better than what we saw at a PFN. So I'd really like to try this one and see what we can do here. So we'll enter into the draft room, Dolphins at pick 13. We'll go ahead and start the draft here momentarily, and we'll go through. So coming up on the 10th pick, and we'll look at some of the things. We'll look at the list of players that are off the board. So we had quarterbacks go 1 and 2 with Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders. Travis Hunter's gone. Ashton Genty, Mason Graham, Jahdae Barron, Ted McMillan, Will Campbell, Armand Membu, Abdul Carter, Matthew Golden, Tyler Warren are the names that are gone. So the Dolphins are sitting at pick 13, and the Pro Football Focus board has Malachi Starks as the top player. He is their 9th ranked player. His average draft position is 18.9. So this is a little bit of a bargain here based on the Pro Football Focus board. The players available, we have Malachi Starks, Jahad Campbell, who, as much as I love him, I feel like his stock may dip a little because he had labrum surgery due to a combine medical check. Mike Green, for the defensive end from Marshall, who has some legal issues off the field that I think are still unsettled. Will Johnson, Luther Burden III, James Pierce, Donovan Zirakagu, I don't know how you say it, the defensive end from Boston College, Kenneth Grant, Josh Simmons, Emeka Ibuka, and Kelvin Banks are the players on the board from 9 to 20 that are still sitting here. So for me, if you're going to run this defense the way it needs to run, I still think you need more in the back end. Now, I know people are going to say, oh, well, what about corner? What about corner? This is a very zone-heavy defense, and a lot of what you're doing is cover 3 and disguises to get in and out of cover 3 or quarters or 2-man. So getting someone like a Will Johnson is not as imperative as it was to have like man corners the way it was under like Brian Flores and Josh Boyer. The Dolphins do a lot of pretty tricky stuff on the back end. You know, they'll have times where like their slot corner, whether it's Kader Kohu or Jalen Ramsey, is basically going to be in the nickel, and then he's going to invert with the safety and then play deep half. So to me, the choice for me, because we didn't get any linemen, Armand Membu and Will Campbell both went. If those two were here, I would have to consider it. I think now that they have Pharaoh Brown, I've at least softened a little bit on tight end here, although I do see how Tyler Warren would be a force multiplier. Those three guys, Warren, Membu, and Will Campbell, are the three guys on offense that I would really consider at 13. On defense, for me, it's Kenneth Grant, the monstrous defensive tackle out of Michigan. And in no way, shape, or form should the Dolphins re-signing Benito Jones prohibit you from that. Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia. And then I think you would have to look at Jahdae Barron, although in this scenario, he is off the board. He went 6th to the Raiders in this draft. So Grant, Barron, Starks, and Will Johnson are kind of the 4 guys that I would consider, along with Jahad Campbell, although I think with the linebackers the Dolphins signed, they're probably out of that market. Barron's off the board, so we'll cross Barron and Campbell off. So to me, it's between Kenneth Grant, Malachi Starks, and Will Johnson. I don't think the emphasis on corner is high enough, so it becomes sort of between Malachi Starks and Kenneth Grant. And as much as I love Kenneth Grant, I did some work for PFF last summer. I texted multiple people that I thought he was better than Mason Graham, and he's going to be a tremendous pro. I think I'm inclined to stick with Malachi Starks and make him our pick here because the defensive tackle class is so good. And we'll watch these picks file through here. We'll see where Kenneth Grant goes. He's still on the board as we're on to the Chargers at 22. He went 24 to the Vikings. So Brian Flores gets a big guy up front, which would be scary as hell for that defense as we move into round 2. But I think you look at the defensive tackle class, beyond Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, you still have big noses like Tyleik Williams, who unfortunately just went off the board to the Saints at 40. But you've got guys like Tyleik Williams, you've got Jamari Caldwell from Oregon, you've got CJ West from Indiana, Jordan Phillips from Maryland. I'm not a big fan of Deion Walker from Kentucky, but he's there. You know, looking at this class, the safety position kind of dries up quick after Malachi Starks, Nick Eamon-Worry, and Xavier Watts. And in this scenario, Xavier Watts went at pick 46 to Atlanta. So he's off the board. So if we had gone Kenneth Grant at 13, I think we kind of missed our safety run, and we're going to have to scramble for something. I don't like that. So we're at 48. They have a couple corners. Maxwell Hairston and Savon Revel are here on the board. Princely Emmanuel from Ole Miss, Braden Swinson from LSU, 2 really good pass rushers are on the board. Carson Schwessinger is on the board, JT Tuamolo. We have quite a bit of a dip here. There's an interesting corner I like from Iowa State and Darian Porter. And we still have some talent at defensive tackle. I am very curious where they have someone like Jamari Caldwell rated, because they have Alfred Collins rated the 71st best player. They have Jamari Caldwell rated 118th. They have Deion Walker rated 106. Jordan Phillips is 80. So as much as I'd love to grab one of these guys, with the corners they have on the board, I would take a page out of Philly. Philly last year drafted Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean 1-2. We're basically going opposite here. I'm going to take Savon Revel, the corner from South Carolina, here at 48. So I've upgraded the secondary. We've gotten Savon Revel as a corner, Malachi Starks as a safety. We still have Ifeatu Melifonwu, Ashton Davis at safety. We've got Jalen Ramsey, Kader Kohu. You still have Cam Smith that you're developing. I like our secondary better now. And again, it seems early to take some of the guards at that spot. And I know that's what Dolphins fans are really focused on. And we lost Jordan Phillips, went off the board, the D tackle here, as we come up on pick number 90. Tate Ratledge would have been a nice target, the guard from Georgia, but he went to the Ravens, a very Ravens pick. So now we are on the board here at pick 98. And we would have had a chance to get Andrew Makuba, the safety from Texas. He's still on the board. Lathan Ransom is still on the board. Those are players number 2 and 3 overall on the Pro Football Focus board. Charles Grant. There's a string of tackles. Charles Grant, Anthony Belton, both available. Deion Walker is available. Jamari Caldwell is still available. Now, this might be a little bit of a reach. The Dolphins do have pick 115. We still have several defensive tackles out there. J.J. Puigs, Jamari Caldwell, Deion Walker still available. So for me right now, I think because we do have Benito Jones, I wouldn't hold off on Kenneth Grant because of Benito. But I think I'd be willing to risk seeing if one of the two between Walker and Jamari Caldwell were able to get to 115 if this was actually a 4-round simulation. I didn't pay for the full version here by PFF. I'm going to take Charles Grant, the tackle from William and Mary. Not built like a prototypical NFL tackle, but he's got long arms. He's a wrestler, new to football, didn't play till his senior year in high school. Could play guard. To me, I would try and slot him as the left guard in this offense. So our first 3 picks here in the draft, Malachi Starks, Savon Revel, and Charles Grant. And looking at our position relative to the PFF board, we gained some value. We gained, let's see, Malachi Starks at 13. He's their 9th rated player on the board, so that's 4 spots of value. Savon Revel, we got at pick 48. He's number 43, so that's another 5 spots of value. So we're up to 9 spots of value here. We took Charles Grant at 98. He's 97th. So kind of 6 value points, if you will, for our draft here with what we took in the Pro Football Focus mock draft in the first 3 rounds. From there, to me, it still feels like you need to address the defensive interior would be the big one. So you'd probably hope that Jamari Caldwell is there at pick 115. I think Caldwell was rated their 118th player. So if the NFL sees it similarly, you might have a shot to get that. And there's also some later, like day 3 options. Nazir Stackhouse from Georgia, Yahya Black from Iowa. That could be your big physical, 1-down run plugger type guys. But again, for me, I think the real battle there was what to do at pick 13. Do you take Kenneth Grant, who, at best is probably going to play less than 60% of your snaps as a rookie? I think you have to kind of unlock some of that pass rush potential with him to make him a 3-down player. And this defense is very much based on heavy rotations. So I think there's more value in Malachi Starks because he probably wouldn't leave the field ever in terms of just volume of snaps taken if you take him at pick 13. Is he the next Ed Reed? I don't think so. I think it's more likely that Kenneth Grant would be the next, like Vince Wilfork or Michael Pierce, than it is Malachi Starks would become the next Ed Reed. But I think Chris Greer's always kind of shown he'll take safety above risk early in the draft. I know you can make the case for Laramie Tunsil, but pretty much everybody had him as the top player on their board. He fell to 13 because of the gas mask and the quarterbacks getting taken high. He took Minkah Fitzpatrick over Derwin James, Christian Wilkins over Jeffrey Simmons coming off a knee injury. That's just kind of how Chris Greer's nature is, and I think Malachi Starks is safer to take in that vacuum than Kenneth Grant. So, again, my 3 picks, Malachi Starks, Savon Revel, the corner from East Carolina, and Charles Grant from William and Mary at 13, 48, and 98, respectively. That's going to do it for this show. We'll come back with another show probably within the next week or 2. Hope you guys enjoyed the program. Follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4. You can follow the show on DolphinsTalk.com, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Please check out all the other writers and shows on DolphinsTalk.com. Have a great week, and since it is opening week of Major League Baseball, go Reds. This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly was brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, Caneswear.com.